Welcome back, folks. Today we're going to check out Avowed, the latest release from Obsidian Entertainment, and a game I have been keeping my eye on ever since that initial reveal teaser. So in the past 2 days I played around 10 hours of the game, and keep in mind that the key for Avowed was provided by Xbox for review purposes. But these will be my first impressions, as it's too early for me to do a full detailed review until I'm done with everything in the game. Avowed can be described as an action RPG with open world areas. By that I mean the main areas of the game, even though are not fully open world, are still somewhat big in size, where you will always have zones like caves, cities, fortresses, and other smaller type locations that are going to be separated by loading screens. But luckily there isn't really a lot of them, so you won't have to worry about that. It's not going to be a loading fiesta. And at the start you do the classic thing of creating your character. Options were okay. There are presets to choose from that you'll later edit further down with like eyes, brows, nose, face shape and so on. There is room to make a weird looking protagonist if that's what you're looking for, but overall it's okay on that front. It does have some impressive mustaches, so I had to get one. Besides that, you select your background, which is going to play a role during dialogue and quests, and will be a foundation of what you want to play as a character. From Arcane Scholar, Court Augur, Noble Shion, Vanguard Scout and War Hero. So you kinda get the hang of what this means, as this will also differ depending on which character you're talking to and how you want to influence those characters during dialogue. You can also display or not your godlike features like hair and so on, which will make NPCs react to them, being it's connected to a story, but this is a spoiler-free video so I won't go into those specifics. Gameplay loop is somewhat a classic default RPG experience, meaning that you will do main side missions and activities like bounty hunting, for example, where you go and destroy a bandit faction, their leaders, and get paid for doing so. Money from those quests and by selling items can be used to buy new stuff, pretty classic, which you will need for your travels like health potions at start and so on, but also potentially buying weapons and armor, although that's debatable being that you can find a lot of it as you explore and for quest rewards. Besides that, you can set up a camp where you can upgrade your weapons and armor using stuff you pretty much find as you explore, that being stuff on the ground or in chests which tend to be hidden. By upgrading your weapons it goes up in quality, as well as the status of the weapon changes, and then everything else goes up like damage and so on, where it can provide other bonuses, but of course upgrading it can cost a lot of resources at start even if you do everything. This game also has unique items for both weapons and armor that you can enhance to provide you additional bonuses, also using the materials you find during exploration. And you will have to upgrade, being that enemies in this game are not that easy to fight, but I will talk more about that in the combat segment of the video. There are also companions that follow you around, and when fighting you can use their abilities to help you out or attack someone, but even if you don't use them, they will use it on their own, and on top of that they can provide additional bonuses like abilities to get you through some locked areas or doors, or pretty much inaccessible areas that, some ability has to be used. And you will have to use them at start, being that one thing I like about this game is that they really placed a lot of stuff to find if you explore, and some can be hidden really well, as you should always pay attention, as I got some really nice loot from weapons to armor in those chests. Even using magic to traverse some things like forming ice so you can cross water, using lightning abilities to charge up power to open doors and so on, so there's definitely that. Speaking of abilities, there are 3 main trees, that being Fighter, Ranger and Wizard, which are also separated into different buffs and attacks you can do. There is also Godlike tab that also features abilities that will, buff you in terms of health and essence, which is basically mana in this game. You can also upgrade companion abilities as well as change what bonuses they do and what's best to help you in combat in what way. But to be honest, companions were kinda okay in fighting, because most of the time I ended up finishing everything by myself, as they couldn't handle one mob. You can mix and match these abilities, so you really don't have to focus on one, although I noticed that being a jack of all trades in this game is not really the best thing, but rather having one primary and one secondary objective for your character depending on what sort of weapons you want to use and what sort of abilities, so they complement each other the best. There are also attributes like might, constitution, dexterity, perception, intellect and resolve, which you will be increasing, per level you're gonna be getting a point for them, that give you buffs for things like damage, attack speed, resistances, stamina and so on. Plus you can use special dialogue lines which derive from these attributes, so if you need to see something you will need perception, for example, or intelligence to understand it. Might can be useful for combat purposes or when you need to scare someone. They can be useful, although I notice they appear often. I think in most dialogue scenarios, even if it's not too important, you can kinda use it. Going to the story itself, without spoiling too much, Avowed is set in the Pillars of Eternity universe. I think continuing 3 years after the events of the previous Pillars game, but I don't know all of the specifics of the lore to give you a detailed answer on this. But you don't technically need to know what happened before, as they kind of explain some events as you play, and there are a lot of things to find and read in codex that will provide info about the world and general lore on who is who and what's happening and which title does what, which city does what and so on. You as a character are an envoy sent to the Living Lands to combat this new threat that is going to be a problem for the Edirene Empire, so your job is to pretty much find out what it is and remove the problem. The nuance is also that you are a godlike, which means you were blessed by gods before the birth, and that also plays a role in the story. I mean, lore-wise there is definitely a lot here, as Pillars by itself already has an established universe, so I didn't really have a problem with that, as most of the locations I visited were interesting. There were a few things which maybe stylistically were kinda weird and out of place, but this is a weird universe after all. Now, because this is an Obsidian game and writing in their RPGs was always fantastic, this one was okay. To be honest, there are some interesting moments, but there were characters that felt a bit too bland and forgettable for me. I mean, there are some quest lines here which feel too gamey for me, like, hi, I need this for that, and that's about it, there is no twist or turn. Now, on the other hand, there were some side quests that have those twists and turns, and ultimately you can decide how to tackle those situations, either through diplomacy, lying, combat, which does influence how stuff ends and even what rewards you receive in it. Although those choices were pretty much sometimes just black and white, pretty much it. Dialogue-wise, besides the usual responses you can give, as I said, your attributes will play a role in how you respond. Most of the time it's useful, as you can swindle your way around a peaceful solution to a quest or do stuff which can be really out of your way, but it's happening kinda all the time. I personally turned the entire district against me in the first town as I made some decisions, their leader showed up and whole hell broke loose. I mean, so far it did punish me by making me fight a lot of enemies, but outside of that, I didn't really see people mentioning that I caused issues, or it didn't really impede my progression of the game in a big way, so you're not gonna be going in jail or something like that. It's not really a case or a feature in this game. Main story, I think, starts out a bit too slow, mostly setting you in this area, but later on it expands and becomes more interesting. Again, nothing so far that I will remember for a long time, but it's alright. I mean, I didn't have a huge problem with it, as dialogue for most of the time was in relation to what is interesting or the situation at hand, and they didn't go into tantrums or rants that are there just to expand the dialogue and provide nothing at all, so I didn't really notice that all that much. But are they sometimes dry and uninteresting conversations? Yeah, I mean, luckily I always had the option to say, alright, see you, I don't need to know more, but sometimes there can be options where you find an NPC that has a lot of dialogue lines, a lot of questions you can ask. And of course they can be interesting things, but sometimes the way the NPC starts describing those things can be a bit boring. Now, going over to combat, I had a weird experience with it. So the game does have first and third person perspective that you can fight in and all, but I ended up, spending most of the time in the first person, as third one was okay, but I didn't really feel like I wanted to use it for fighting as it tends to be floaty, and that's something I will talk about a lot, the floatiness. In this game you can mix and match weapons and armor to really suit your needs, meaning the game offers daggers, short swords, long swords, hammers, axes, bows, pistols, rifles, wands, magic books and so on, that depending on your playstyle you will have to switch around for the best performance. Anything one-handed you can equip in your left or right hand, so you can use a pistol and a magic book, 2 one-handed weapons, 2 guns, just a gun, just a sword or a wand. So I will give them props to that, because I found myself constantly switching stuff to see what works and what combinations feel the best for fighting enemies. But you know, some weapons at start, like for example the pistol, can be incredibly overpowered compared to everything else I picked up. As you attack, you spend stamina, and basically every single attack with every single weapon can be charged to do more damage. I mean, that wasn't a huge problem for me when it comes to like that stamina consumption, but oh boy, sometimes it can cause issues if you are not careful. You can also dash, which you will be doing a lot, as getting hit in this game can lower your HP a lot, and fighting multiple opponents can be tricky. Magic is also insanely OP at start, so I recommend that as well. By fighting and using your abilities, you can also increase the stun effect on enemy, where if the yellow line is full, it becomes incapacitated, so you can do special attack on it, which is pretty much automatic, but it still does good damage. That's what I liked, but to be honest, it took some time until this combat clicked for me. It can be heavy and crunchy, of course, I like that, but I didn't see a problem with that. It's just sometimes I felt like the way I was hitting an enemy or how the enemy was attacking me can be very awkward. Especially if there is this magnetic attack, meaning that like you can see here when they attack, their animation like makes a step, but their entire body basically gets magnetically pulled towards you as a character, forcing them into places where they can slide around and their attacks can feel weird. I never like that in any game. This can be problematic, as I said. I noticed enemies moonwalking or moving into the side in the wrong way, ultimately changing their direction so abruptly, you know, attacking me that I couldn't even read the attack right. And their AI can be all over the place. There has been multiple occasions where I was fighting enemies and I guess I go out of the range where they are allowed to walk, and what happens is that their AI completely breaks, so they're just pretty much walking or running around me, not doing any damage, trying to go back to their original area, and they couldn't recognize me attacking them, so it was just awkward, as you can see from this gameplay. And this is something which has been happening to me multiple times. This is not just one example, so it's just sometimes weird how movement and animation is done. I mean, most boss fights are like that, where they just slide around during their attacks, which didn't really make it fun to me. I mean, I was able to dodge their attacks really easily, but it felt weird. Of course, later on, as you get more weapons and abilities, I started liking the combat a bit more and getting used to it. And of course, it's not really a problem, like I don't have a huge problem with combat in this game, but I still feel like sometimes the way enemies behave and they attack you can be kinda weird. Graphically and stylistically, this game is alright, I won't lie. There were some locations which I found really good looking and just beautiful. Monsters as well, like that's okay, that's interesting. I'm definitely interested to see more of this world, although performance for me personally was hit or miss. As you can see on the screen, my PC specs, you know, keep in mind I'm also playing with the latest Nvidia drivers installed that came out I think on the same day as early access was released. Through most of the map there will be pockets that will lower my frame rate. Keep in mind it never drops into single digits, but I definitely saw a lot of moments, especially during combat, where my frame rate just dips or is incredibly all over the place. This is mostly happening in larger open areas. With smaller areas you enter didn't really give me those problems at all and frame rate was fantastic, so it might have to do something with how it loads stuff in front of you in those open areas. Interestingly enough, even switching overall graphics settings, I didn't really see a huge difference, and the frame rate was jumping up and down through those locations such as the city, regardless of what graphical settings I had on. Even after disabling ray tracing, I didn't really see a difference, because when it doesn't have these problems, games runs just fine on my PC, even on the highest settings, but oh boy, sometimes going through the map, it can be all over the place. It's an Unreal Engine 5 game, so I'm not surprised, being that I noticed similar issues with this loading in larger areas regardless of the UE5 game I played. This is somewhat of a common occurrence by now. It didn't go to the point where I said I cannot play anymore though, and besides that, I also get these weird stutters from time to time regardless of where I am, but they were not so constant to the point. My main problem would be with these frame rate dips. So if there is one thing I want them to address as soon as possible, it's definitely performance in those areas. As going even from recommended system requirements, it shouldn't be causing this many issues even under low settings. I was also not lucky with the stability of this game, as I got this Alabama error for about 6 times now, as I said, in about 10 hours of playing it. It mostly happens when I try to open and close the map fast, and it just crashes fully. Being that I think Alabama is probably a code name for this title, if anything, at first it was a funny, crash, but to be honest, later on it became a bit annoying. So that's something they should definitely address, and it will be interesting to see how this does when more people get access to the game with more configurations and PCs, because right now this is, still in early access. So what do I think about Avowed? Well, first impressions were okay. To be honest, it didn't really grab my attention fully at start. I will be absolutely finishing it, but overall experience was pretty okay for me at best. I mean, it's alright though, as I don't expect every single game to be the next industry changer, but it's weird as there are still things here that make me want to go back and play it, as I enjoy roaming around, finding stuff like locations are really nice. I mean, for me personally, the experience would be even better if performance wasn't all over the place, because the rest of the stuff I can get used to, and I mean, I'm getting a crash every hour or so, so that's also a problem. As a time filler between some games, I think this will do its job, as another problem with this title is how it introduces everything to you, and I think a better job should be done there, especially because later on the story becomes much more interesting as still, things start revealing themselves and story becomes deeper, but at start it can be okay. Pricing wise, I also would not personally recommend that you pay 70 euros, dollars or your region equivalent for this, especially because early access price is 90 euros, so that's wild to me. But Avowed will be available on release on Game Pass, the normal release date. So if you have it, then definitely I tell you go download this game on Game Pass, because first off you're gonna test it and see if this is really for you. I mean, again, 70 euros can be a bit too steep for this game in my opinion. I don't know if this is a popular opinion or not, but to be honest, this is what I felt personally playing it, as I tend to watch reviews from other people when I finish my own video first, as I want to go into this completely blind. So long story short, it's an alright game. I don't really have a huge problem with it. It's going to be something I'm going to finish, but did I kinda expect more, or maybe to be kinda gripped with the story a bit more from like Obsidian? Definitely yes. But you tell me down below in the comments, what did you think about Avowed, and what would be your pros and cons of the game? I'm very interested to hear your opinion about it. If you enjoyed this video, consider liking and subscribing for more. Join our community on Discord and Twitter, and huge thanks to my current Patreon supporters. This is LKM signing out, and stay classy everyone. Bye bye.